if the fundamental challenges that capitalism is posing is that it can't produce enough jobs, we need to be thinking about how do we change our strategy. And I think the strategy of full employment through producing more and more jobs is a losing strategy. I don't think it can work under these conditions. So we have to aim towards a sort of post-work future. And in our book, we raise 4 demands which don't solve everything. I want to say that right up front. But they get us to something different from where we are. They get us out of neoliberalism. They get us into a situation which is radically different and which gives us, very importantly, gives workers and people a lot more power. So I'll go through each of these in a little more detail. Now, the first demand is for full automation. And you may sort of ask, well, why do we need to demand full automation? Haven't I just said capitalism automates everything? It does, unless it can find really cheap workers. And then capitalism would prefer to use cheap workers rather than automate a job. This is what you've seen when you've got a lot of outsourcing work. It's what you see in the UK right now, where basically automation is non-existent, but we've got really high employment just because workers have lost 10% of their real wages since 2008. So we've got wages going down, work becoming more precarious, and no automation in the UK. So the demand for full automation is to say, well, we need to struggle to raise wages at a basic level. We need to be helping people across the world to raise wages, to incentivize capitalism to automate the worst work. We also need to think about automating work that capitalism wouldn't automate on its own. A great example of this is domestic labor. There's no profit incentives for capitalism to automate a lot of domestic labor, but domestic work is work. I hate it. Cleaning and laundry and all of this stuff. How do we automate this sort of work? And I think this is something that we need to demand rather than just assuming it's going to happen naturally. The other aspect of a demand for full automation is to say, well, it is political. It's not an economic necessity. It's not a technological necessity. It's a political choice. And when new automation technology comes into your workplace, you need to be asking, what is it doing to work? What is it doing to us? How do we take advantage of it? How do we use it to our benefit rather than just to the benefit of managers? So it's to make automation a political thing rather than anything natural. Now, the second demand is for a reduced working week. And I mentioned earlier that the original impetus of the labor movement was to reduce work, not to make good work. And a sort of interesting thing I learned when I was researching the book was that the weekend as we know it, the 2-day weekend, started off because people would get the Sunday off for religious reasons. They'd get really drunk and not come in the next day because they were too hungover. And basically, it was a sort of informal weekend, and it eventually just got formalized as a 2-day weekend. I think we need to continue that. Maybe not exactly, but I think we need to be thinking about extending the weekend. Now, there's a number of different ways to do this. So Sweden, for instance, is experimenting with a 6-hour working day right now. My preference is for a 3-day weekend. I think the major reason why I prefer to shorten the working week rather than the working day is basically for environmental reasons. If we take a working day off, that's one less day of people commuting to and from work. It's one less day of office lights and factories being open. It's an immense benefit to the environment. There's been one study in the US, for instance, which looked at if America moved from their working week to the average European working week, they'd save 20% of their energy consumption. So I think if we want to talk about what a sustainable future looks like, it has to involve less work. So a reduction of the working week as a second demand. A third demand, though, is universal basic income. Probably everybody's heard about this now. It seems to be everywhere at the moment. But the idea is basically that the government provides you with a livable amount of money, no questions asked. It doesn't matter whether you're looking for a job. It doesn't matter whether you're spending all your money on video games or anything else. They just give you the money as a means to survive. Now, there's good economic reasons why we might want a basic income. If robots are doing all the work, who's buying it? Well, basic income sort of provides the money to continue purchasing goods. But I think the most important part of a universal basic income is the political change that it implements. So imagine you have a universal basic income and you're working at some terrible job. Either it's dangerous or it's demeaning or it's just, distraught. You can basically tell your boss, I don't want to do this job anymore, quit, and you know that you have your basic income to survive on. So individually, it gives people a lot more power over their bosses. It allows you to step away from terrible jobs. It allows you to go back and find a better education so you can get a better job rather than just accepting the first terrible job that comes along. And I think collectively, it gives a lot of power to workers as well. So one of the biggest difficulties of maintaining a strike is precisely that you're not getting paid. So normally you rely upon strike funds or second income from a partner. With a universal basic income, it'd be so easy to have a strike. And I think that this is a really big political shift, and it gives power back to labor in a way that something like a minimum wage increase doesn't by itself. And this is why I think something like a basic income is incredibly important for changing the power dynamics today. It's one of the only ways I think workers can gain more power right now. So a universal basic income is the third demand. Now, the fourth demand, whenever we talk about the end of work, Alex and I, one of the questions we always get is, but yeah, don't people enjoy work? And so this is why the fourth demand is the end of the work ethic. It's basically to say that we have been culturally and socially built up to have this idea that work is the be-all and end-all. When you meet somebody for the first time and you ask them, oh, what do? You never mean, what are your hobbies? You mean, what is your job? And this is so ingrained in our sense of identity and the way that we meet people and socialize and network. Work is central to so many aspects of our lives. And if we're going to build a post-work world, we need to be thinking about how do we replace the work ethic? How do we have a sort of alternative ethic and alternative ways for people to socialize and meet people? And I should say, I think I'm not against work per se. I mean, this book took a lot of work. But I think the idea that jobs are the best way to sort of satisfy that desire to work is a sort of perverse way of handling it. I think most people, if given the option, would much rather be doing something else than stocking shelves at a grocery store or working deep in a mine or anything like that. So what we're talking about when we talk about post-work is not the end of work per se. It's instead to give people the freedom to choose where they're delegating their efforts. What are you actually doing? Do you want to work at this job, or would you prefer to stay at home and take care of a family, go back and get an education, start a business, play video games all day, whatever you want to do. But the end of the work ethic is part of getting there. And this means a cultural shift and a subjective shift in society. So these are the four demands. Now I should say that these lead us to not the absolute end of work, but they do lead to a massive reduction in work. They also don't lead us beyond capitalism. So we still have markets, we still have businesses oriented towards making profits, we still have economies oriented towards endless accumulation. We're not beyond capitalism if we got these four demands. But if we get these four demands, what we do have is a lot more free time, a lot more freedom for people, a lot more power for people as well, to choose what they want to do and to have a say over the nature of their work and over the nature of their lives. So I think what can happen if we were to get these four demands is that then we can start thinking about what goes on beyond that, beyond just the post-work world. How can we improve our economies more than just this?